Welcome to Key Tech. Please describe this channel if you are interested in today's video. In recent years, India has tightened supervision and review of Chinese-funded companies, resulting in many Chinese companies' investment applications in India being rejected and being sentenced for violations. Among them, Xiaomi has become one of the most typical cases. It was fined 4.8 billion rupees by India for violating local regulations. However, after many in-depth negotiations, India announced the lifting of the ban on Xiaomi, recovered the fine, and at the same time lifted restrictions on Xiaomi in the Indian market. The news received widespread attention and praise. For Chinese companies, this means an important victory in the Indian market. At the same time, Xiaomi has a high market share in India, and the news of the lifting of the ban will also give it more development opportunities in the Indian market. In addition, this may also be a goodwill sent by India to Chinese companies, which brings certain hope for the future development of Chinese companies in the Indian market. However, as for the intentions and impact behind this lifting of the ban, China should not just look at the surface, but need to conduct an in-depth analysis of this incident. Let China analyze the factors driving Xiaomi's lifting of the ban. 1. The impact on Xiaomi is greater than the impact on the interests of the Indian market. Although the fine against Xiaomi may have a certain impact on the interests of the Indian market, Xiaomi also faces many problems. On the one hand, it is burdened with unwarranted crimes. On the other hand, it may lose more share in the Indian market. In comparison, Xiaomi is at a disadvantage. It is for this reason that Xiaomi continues to communicate and negotiate with the local authorities in India to strive for the lifting of the ban. For now, India's lifting of lockdown seems to be making everyone happy. However, from another perspective, this also shows that the fate of many Chinese-funded companies in the Indian market is completely in India's hands. After all, they never provided solid evidence in the first place. Therefore, in such a market environment, this lifting of the ban is a warning to Chinese companies. It means that to survive in the Indian market, it is not important to truly comply with the regulations. What is important is to follow India's pace. 2. The warning effect behind the lifting of the ban on Xiaomi. At the same time as Xiaomi was lifted from the ban, India began to review another Chinese company, Lenovo, because the Indian authorities suspected Lenovo of tax evasion. The two things are tied together because there are market rumors that one of the reasons for India to withdraw the fine against Xiaomi may be that they have already received the expected amount of the fine. In other words, they believed that the previous fines imposed on the company were sufficient, and there was no need to reinvent the wheel. Now, Lenovo is in a similar predicament. If Lenovo chooses to compromise and pay the relevant fines, it can avoid further trouble. But failure to compromise is likely to trigger a new round of fines, and may also result in the loss of part of the Indian market share. Obviously, Lenovo doesn't want to see this happen. Therefore, from this perspective, by lifting the ban on Xiaomi, India is actually warning other Chinese companies in disguise. Thoughts on the deeper meaning behind India's lifting of the ban. Although India's lifting of the ban on Chinese-funded enterprises this time gives a positive signal, it also hides certain challenges. The attitude of the Indian government is actually a warning to Chinese companies. It tells China that it is not easy for Chinese-funded enterprises to develop in the Indian market, and they need to constantly communicate and negotiate with the Indian side. During this process, businesses need to be very careful and comply with local regulations and laws. Otherwise, once India's bottom line is violated, it may face many difficulties and losses. In addition, judging from India's censorship of Lenovo after lifting the ban on Xiaomi, China can conclude that India has not really relented. It only showed favor to Chinese-funded enterprises by lifting the ban on Xiaomi, but it has not relaxed its enforcement and management. In other words, the Indian government's scrutiny and restrictions on Chinese-funded enterprises have not weakened, and Chinese-funded enterprises still face great challenges in the Indian market. Therefore, when Chinese-funded enterprises enter the Indian market, they need to be more cautious, clarify their development direction, and be fully prepared in terms of compliance to avoid potential risks and losses. In addition, India's negotiations and review of Chinese-funded enterprises also reflect its high concern for its own market and interests. As an emerging market, although India has attracted a large amount of foreign investment and foreign invested enterprises, it has also realized the importance of its own interests. By strengthening the supervision and review of Chinese-funded enterprises, India has not only protected its own market order, but also provided greater development opportunities for its domestic enterprises. Therefore, China cannot simply regard India's behavior as a suppression of Chinese companies, but should also realize that it contains the protection of India's own interests. Although the news of India lifting the ban on Xiaomi gives people mixed feelings, it sends a warning to Chinese companies. The development of Chinese-funded enterprises in the Indian market faces both opportunities and challenges, and they need to operate and manage in compliance with the requirements of the Indian government. At the same time, the Indian government's negotiations and review of Chinese-funded enterprises reflect its high concern for its own market and interests, which is a signal worth paying attention to. Therefore, before entering the Indian market, Chinese-funded enterprises need to fully understand the local laws, regulations, and market environment, and make comprehensive risk assessment and compliance preparations in order to achieve long-term and stable development in the Indian market.